Hi guys, how's it going? Ivano here, and today we're going to be talking about some of the basics of Warzone strategy, how you can know that you will win a fight before it even starts. So, before you get into this, make sure that your settings are on point first. Make sure that your camera is zoomed out so you can even see what's going on in the Warzone. If you haven't seen it already, I did a full video where I talk about the best settings and how you can make sure that you actually know what's going on, how to control your character. So check that out if you haven't already. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is sometimes also called macro play. Why? Because it's about the big picture. So these will be things as when to fight, when not to fight, a little bit about the general principles of engagement, as opposed to the micro aspects of play, which are about how you execute the fight. So how you fight, how to maximize your damage or healing, and how to outplay your opponents. This will be the topic of another video. So today we're talking about the general strategy. First thing that's important is knowing where everyone is. So that includes your team, and it also includes the enemy team, of course. This is why zooming out your camera is important, because it allows you to see more, obviously. Another tip I would have for this one is just moving your camera around regularly so that you can see what's going on behind you. But also, very important, use your minimap. As of 7.2.1, the latest patch that just dropped, you can now see enemies and combat on the minimap. A little example here. So this was a Warzone we played the other day. And you see on the minimap right now, we are running into this Warzone. You can not see the enemies yet, but you can see your own team here. But as soon as we engage the enemy and they're in combat, you will see these red dots on the minimap. Here, for example. And this is very useful because basically if you know where people are, where they are about to go, you can see the direction. And now I can see that the operative healer just vanished out of sight here, but he's still in combat, he's here. Because of how combat detection works in this game, I can still see him. And I can actually see that he's coming back into the fight to heal his teammates, and that allows me to go on him and eventually kill him. So the new minimap, very useful. This is actually the pop-out map. Make sure you have this set up, and this will allow you to see where your team is and where the enemies are. Okay, why is that important? Well, on a very basic level, much like in real life, if you keep picking stupid fights, you're going to have a bad time. So the number one principle of winning a fight in this game is never fight fair. You want to preferably engage only in fights where you have an advantage. But how do you know if a fight is good or it's bad? Well, there's a couple of points. The first one, and probably most important one, would be numbers. So numbers advantage. What does it mean? It's pretty simple. Let's look at this map of Ancient Hypergate, for example, and imagine we would be on the yellow team. So we have the western pylon, which is right now held by the purple team. Same is true for the east pylon. Now, if I look at this fight in mid, and I would ask you who is about to win this fight in mid, I think in 99.9% of the cases, it would be clear that the yellow team would win this fight. Why is that the case? Because we have 6 players of the yellow team fighting in mid and only 2 players of the purple team. In a 6 versus 2, you're going to have so much more raw healing and damage output that those 2 players, even if they're the best players in the world, almost cannot win this fight. So rule number 1 of picking a good fight is always make sure you have a numbers advantage. So you're fighting with more people in your team than on the enemy team. Next one, a fight is good if it happens closer to your respawn than it happens to the enemy respawn. Okay, so let's look at another example. In this Nowhere Coast, we have a one-on-one going on in south. Both teams have 1 player in respawn. And then over here in east, we have a 6v6 going on. So equal numbers, it should be an equal fight, right? No, that's not really the case. Because what will happen now after the respawn doors open? Both of these players will reinforce their teams. So let's say this guy goes to east. He has a shorter way to travel to east in order to reinforce his team. And the guy on the purple team will have to run all the way over here in order to join the team fight. So he will get here earlier, turning the fight into a 6 versus 7 for his team, which means that his team has an advantage. So even though the fight might be on equal numbers right now, the closer it is to your respawn, will mean that this is an advantage for your team. And then finally, a fight is good if your team has more cooldowns and resources. So that can mean your team has more HP while the other team is low. In order to see that, of course, you can look at your operations frames that you have set up. It can also mean that the enemy healer is at full force while your healer is out of force. And if that happens, run, because if you're out of resource, you cannot play the game, right? A PowerTech that's overheated will not do any damage, and he might as well not be in the fight. In general, if you have more cooldowns available and more resources than the enemy team, that is good. And that kind of ties into the earlier point about fighting close to your respawn. And that is because if you die in a fight, then you will respawn with full resources, right? Obviously, you will still have cooldowns, but if I'm a PowerTech and I'm completely overheated, sometimes it's better if my healer actually lets me die, because then I will respawn without any heat and I can run back into the fight. So in general, if one of these points, either a numbers advantage, respawn proximity, or more cooldowns and resources is true, then you have an advantage and then it's a good fight. If that's not the case, it's a bad fight, so don't take it. Don't fight stupid fights. And if the enemy has the advantage, then sometimes it's better to retreat, regroup with your team, live to fight another day. Does that mean you should never take a losing fight? No, of course not. There are exceptions to this rule. One exception would be if your team is defending the pylon and hypergates, and the enemy team are sending 5 people and there's only 2 of you there. Those 2 people, if there are 2 stealthers, or for example a tank and a healer, can definitely defend that pylon, which can help you win the game. So I'm not saying just because you see 5 enemies coming, run away or cry for help or something. You can definitely take bad fights sometimes, but only if it's about an objective and if it means that it can help you win the game. Okay, finally, some more tips about winning strategies for Warzones. First one would be fight close to objectives. Should be rather obvious that if you're 50 meters away from a pylon and an enemy starts to cap it, you cannot defend it very well. So make sure if you're fighting, don't skirmish somewhere in no man's land. Fight close to the doors, fight close to the pylons if you want to win. Next tip would be to read the ops chat or use Discord to communicate with your teammates if you are playing in pre-made. And what do you want to communicate? Well, you don't want to talk about the weather. You want to communicate where you are right now, where you are going next, or if you need help defending a turret, for example. And then the final rule, if a teammate asks for help, for example, they're defending west in Nowhere Coast, and they're calling incoming, make sure that you're aware of who else on your team is going and reacting to that call, right? It happens many times that, for example, in SWTOR, someone calls incoming for left, and then your whole team starts to run over there, and no one stays behind in order to defend the other door, which then usually leads to a fast cap for the enemy team. So don't overcommit. If someone is calling 2 people incoming, it is enough if one of your team goes to reinforce the other door. That's it for today. Hopefully this video helped you a little bit understand Warzone strategy better. If it did, please remember to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.